Yeah? Everybody good? Well, I'm so glad that you guys are here today. My name's Justin. I'm one of the pastors here. And man, sorry that we had to sit some of you in the cheap seats in the back, but you're closer to the coffee and the cupcakes when it's all over, right? It's like being on the front of the plane, right? You don't really want to sit on the front of the plane, but you're quick in getting out. So you're closest to the homemade cupcakes that we have at the end of the service. So grateful that you guys are here. Man, happy Easter to you guys. We've been praying and planning a lot for today. And I know, as Julianne said, that you could be a lot of different places, and we're just honored that you would spend part of your Easter Sunday with us. If you have a Bible, turn to Luke chapter 24. We're going to get there in just a second. If you don't sweat it. We have a Hope City app that you can download. If you search Hope City Indy on the App Store or on the Google Play Store, our app will come up. It's going to have all the message notes that I'm going to go over here in just a few minutes. Have all that you can follow right along. In fact, you could skip to the end and then just chill on Facebook if you wanted to, okay? You could just do that. But all the notes are on there. All the scriptures that we're going to talk about will be on the screens as well here in just a few minutes. Before we dive into the message, I cannot move forward at all without talking about the 2,000 Peeps that are hanging on the wall back there, all right? So if you're not a fan of Peeps to eat, we have a group of volunteers that came over to our house on Tuesday night for about 4 hours, and they spent about 4 hours yesterday working on this Peep board. There are literally 2,000 Peeps back there that says, "Easter with my Peeps." And so we have a photo booth set up back there. Take some time before you leave today. Take a picture with your family in front of the Easter with My Peeps board. So I want to thank Daniel and Jadana. I want to thank Lindsay and Matt. Lindsay made all of our homemade cupcakes all day yesterday and kind of designed the Peep board as well. So she's a rock star. So can you guys help me thank them? So just so many volunteers have spent so much time creating the environment that hopefully you're going to experience today, and all the things that are happening in Hope City Kids. We have a great group of volunteers that are taking care of your kids right now, and so we're just grateful that you guys are here. And if you're new, this is your first time, we're a 6-month-old church, so we're all new here too. Okay, like this is only my 20th time here. All right, so it's not like if you're among friends. If you're a guest with us today, we just hope that you feel welcome and at home. So, as a new church, we want to establish some. We're not traditional. Anytime you start a service with a Coldplay song, you're not a traditional church, okay? But I thought it would be awesome to establish some traditions as a new church. And so when I was growing up as a kid, I went to a pretty traditional church, and every Easter Sunday, we'd show up, and the pastor would say, "He is risen," and the congregation would say, "Oh, wow, some of you went to my church too. Okay, that's awesome. Okay, all right." So I thought we could kind of just establish that as that's going to be an Easter tradition for us. We might not have a lot of traditions around here, but let's just establish that. So I thought we could just all together just kind of come in on that, all right? So I'll say, "He is risen." He is risen indeed. It's officially Easter right now in my book, all right? Like I'm 12 years old again, and it's awesome, all right? So that's great. But when I was in high school, one of the greatest fears that I realized that I experienced was this fear of failure. I don't know what your fears are. Some of you might be afraid of heights. Some of you might be afraid of the dark, but some of you might be afraid of spiders or bugs. I am super fearful of failure. I have been since I was in high school. I can just remember being paralyzed by fear taking a test, being paralyzed by fear trying out for a team, being paralyzed by fear asking someone out on a date. Like the fear of failing in something has always frightened me. The problem is I'm really good at failure. I'm almost a professional failure. And so no matter how much I fear it, I seem to always do it. I seem to fail repeatedly. And so my first job in high school was at a restaurant called Noble Romans. I don't know if you can really call it a restaurant, but if you ever had Noble Romans, they don't really exist a lot now. I think there's one in Fishers still, 96th Street. I might frequent there quite a bit. But anyway, there used to be these sit-down restaurant pizza places, and I worked there as my first job. And I was so pumped about it, I got a job as a waiter. And I think I got a day and a half of training, and then they trusted me to go out and take care of people. And the first people that came into my section of Noble Romans were 4 state cops. And so I'm really intimidated. They're in their uniform. They're got the hats that they sit down, and I come and I ask them if I could take their order, and they don't know what they want yet. And I said, "Well, can I take your drink order?" And they said, "Well, just bring us 2 pitchers of Diet Coke." I'm okay. So I go back, I get 4 cups of ice, I get 2 pitchers of Diet Coke, I carry it on this little flimsy tray, and I'm 16 years old. And I walk out, and I want to be as professional as possible, so I'm trying to look French, right? I'm trying to hold it up like this, and I wing it down like that, and I've got the cups, so I start setting the cups down, and I don't realize I'm tipping over the tray, and I spill 2 pitchers of Diet Coke on 4 state cops. And I'm more mortified than they are. They're not happy. There's some curse words being said. They jump up. I jump back. I'm worried they're going to shoot me or at least tase me. And so I'm like stepping back and I'm like, I'm so sorry. Let me get some napkins. And I start patting them down in places they should not be patted down on because the drink went on their laps. They're like, we got this, all right? And they didn't even like humor me and say, we know it's your first day as a waiter. They just said, we're out. And they left. And so I go and talk to my boss and I'm trying to overcome this, this failure, obviously this huge failure. A couple days later, I'm on my way to school, and I had a 1988 Pontiac Fiero. Okay, I don't know if you remember these or not. They're supposed to look like Ferraris, but they're Pontiacs, okay? And they're pieces of junk, but I had one, and I thought I was bad in it, okay? And so I'm driving to school, and one of the rules that my dad had is if you get a ticket, you lose your license until you have the money to pay for that ticket. And so I'm going to school, and I'm running a little bit late, and I come around the corner, and I look in my rearview mirror, and I'm getting pulled over. There's a cop, there's a police... there's lights in my rearview mirror. So I pull over, and I'm terrified. First time I've been pulled over. And so I roll down my window, and my hand's shaking. He's like, can I see your license and registration? I'm like, here. I'm not even looking at him, right? I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm dead. I don't even care about being late for school. I care about dying when I get home. And so I'm like, did I do something wrong? He's like, yeah, you ran that yield sign back there. I'm like, ran a yield sign? I'm like, I just took the test like 6 months ago. I don't remember that. And he's like, are you arguing with me right now, son? I'm like, no, I'm not arguing with you. Like, step out of the car. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm getting arrested. So I get out of the car. He's like, put your hands on top of the car. I'm like, okay. So I put my hands on top of it. He starts patting me down. I'm like, what is going on? What did I do wrong? He's like, you spilled Diet Coke on me 2 days ago. He's like, I just had to pull you over. I saw it was you. And he's like, I'm going to call this into the guys. Let them know I got you back. I'm like, all right. Well, a few years later, I go off to college, and I get hired at the school that I went to. I went to a Christian Bible college, and I get hired to be a school representative, to be like a chaperone or be like a host for new students and for potential students as they come on campus. And so our college would typically host these 3 or 4 weekends a year where we would invite high school students to come, and we would host them in our rooms, and we would show them what college life was like. And typically there would be a concert on Friday night, and then we would do some type of activity on Saturday, and then they would have a worship service with us on Sunday and try to recruit them to our school. And my job as like an ambassador for the school is to make the school look good. Okay, that's what I'm hired to do. And I played college basketball, so we had some recruits that were coming in this group of students that were coming onto campus, and one of my other jobs was I was going to organize some open gyms, so we were going to play some ball, try to get a feel if these recruits were going to be good or not. So we're playing open gym, and I'm playing phenomenal. I'm not going to brag on Easter, but it's been 23 years. I can brag. I was playing great, and my team was winning. And we had a couple guys on the team I didn't know, but a couple of the high school players that were prospects were playing really good. It was really fun, and we just kept winning and winning and winning. And this concert was coming up, and there was a band called For Him that was going to be in concert that night. And if those of you that follow Christian music, some of you are laughing, you remember the group For Him. If those of you that never have listened to Christian music, you have no idea what I'm talking about right now. But they were kind of a big deal in Christian music back in the early 90s. And so we're playing, and I'm like, okay, hey, one more game. And the 2 guys on my team are like, hey, we got to go. I'm like, what do you got to go for? He's like, we got to go get ready for the concert. I'm like, well, what time's the concert start? He's like, starts at 7. I'm like, dude, you got like 2 hours, all right? It's like 5 o'clock. It's not even 5 o'clock yet. You got some time. Just stay and play. We're like playing really good. We're like running this whole thing. We're not coming off the court. He's like, no, I got to go get ready for the concert. I said, dude, it's For Him, all right? Like, they're so lame. Why do you have to go to a For Him concert? He's like, I'm in the band. I'm in For Him. The 2 guys were the lead singers of For Him. And I was just hired to make the school look good. All right, that's my job. Just make the school look good. Fail, right? Well, the next summer, actually, I get a job at Target in Crawfordsville, where I'm from, working as a cashier. And cashier's not that hard, right? You just scan things, right? And you're timed on how fast you can scan things, but it's not rocket science. Just scan things, make small talk, make people feel like they're getting a Target experience. So I'm scanning this lady's things, and she's standing in line, and I said to her, I don't have like a lot of small talk to make, and I just said, so when's your baby due? Somehow you knew, without seeing her, that she wasn't pregnant. I did not know that, all right? Fail over and over and over again. It's like I'm a professional failure. It's what I do best, okay? And so this message might actually be an illustration that I use a year from now on what failure looks like, okay? So as I was reading the Easter story, I don't know if you know this or not, but we're going to talk about the resurrection of Jesus, okay? Like, there's spoiler alert, okay? Like, when you come into Christmas service, you're talking about the birth. When you come into Easter, you're talking about the resurrection. And so there's this familiarity that we all have with this story that it feels like a challenge. Like, okay, how are we going to experience Easter uniquely this year? And so I just sat down with kind of my Bible and my computer. I'm like, God, would you just kind of let me see some things that I've never seen before? And one of the things I realized this Easter as I was preparing for today is the story of Jesus and the ministry of Jesus and the purpose and plan of Jesus was a failure. It was a total bust. It was a total failure. It did not work out. It did not come through. It did not do any of the things that he promised it would until Easter. Until Easter morning, the people who were associated with Jesus had been fooled. Until Easter morning, the mission and the ministry of Jesus looked like a complete failure. Nothing worked out like he thought it would. Jesus comes onto the scene, right? And he invites these guys, these unschooled guys, to come and follow him. And he says, hey, I'm going to use you guys to change the world. I'm going to use you guys to allow people to get to know me in a greater way. I'm going to usher in a brand new kingdom. This kingdom isn't going to be about rules and laws and judgment. It's going to be about love and forgiveness and grace. And I'm going to take over the leadership of the people of Israel. I'm the coming king. I'm the Messiah. I'm the savior of the world. And these people bought in. Like, oh my gosh, he's true. This is true. He's walking on water. He's healing people. He's turning water into wine. Right? He's bringing Lazarus back from the dead. This is amazing. They all bought in. And then the last week of Jesus' life, it all turns south. He comes into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, and everybody's worshiping him. Everybody's feeling the vibe. Everybody's feeling the momentum. Everybody thinks that Jesus is going to take his rightful place as the king of Israel. By Thursday night, Jesus knows he's dying. And he has the Last Supper with his closest friends to basically give them final instructions before he is crucified. And he says to them, hey guys, I'm really overwhelmed right now. Would you guys stay awake with me and pray? And you know what they did? They fell asleep. They couldn't even stay awake. It was failure. Like, what kind of leader can inspire his followers just to stay awake? Right? Some of you are struggling to stay awake in my message, right? Like, I get it. It's okay. But that was just a failure. And then they come and arrest him. And the disciples had to be thinking, okay, this isn't going to happen, right? Like, this is all just a trick. This is just a setup. Jesus isn't going to actually be arrested, fail. Jesus isn't going to actually be executed all in the same 24-hour period, fail. Jesus isn't going to allow himself to stay in the tomb on Saturday, fail. Right? The story of Jesus, the mission of Jesus, until Easter Sunday was a complete failure. And then on Easter Sunday, everything changed. Everything changed. And there's different gospel accounts. There's 4 books that start the New Testament: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And they're basically these guys, 3 of whom walked and followed Jesus. The other one, Luke, the one we're going to look at today, his gospel account, he wasn't a follower of Jesus. He wasn't a disciple. He was a follower of Jesus, but he was a physician. And so what I love about his account is he gives details as a physician would, as somebody who had some type of perspective that was outside, looking in perspective, and he gives historical details that are really intriguing in the story. And so we're going to look at Luke chapter 24, verses 1 through 12, and then we'll skip down and look at verses 35 through 43. It says this: but very early on Sunday morning, the women went to the tomb, taking the spices they had prepared. They found that the stone had been rolled away from the entrance, so they went in, but they didn't find the body of the Lord Jesus. As they stood there puzzled, 2 men suddenly appeared to them, clothed in dazzling robes. The women were terrified and bowed with their faces to the ground. Then the men asked, why are you looking among the dead for someone who is alive? He isn't here. He is risen from the dead. Remember what he told you back in Galilee, that the Son of Man must be betrayed into the hands of sinful men and be crucified, and that he would rise again on the 3rd day? And so there's this epiphany that comes over them. I don't know if you've ever had a conversation with somebody and they tell you something and you just kind of discount it because it's not really relevant at that point. And so that's kind of what they did with the crucifixion of Jesus. Jesus was experiencing so much momentum in his ministry. He's like, yeah, I'm going to die and be resurrected on the 3rd day. They're like, yeah, whatever. Okay. And they just kind of forgot it. And so here, after these angels tell these people, like, oh yeah, okay, we remember that. They go back to that place. Verse 8, then they remembered that he had said this. So they rushed back from the tomb to his 11 disciples and everyone else and told them what had happened. It was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and several other women who had told the apostles what happened. Now, he gives you a list in this passage of Scripture on purpose. back in this time, what would happen is if something of historical record took place, a writer that was trying to give a historical account would include specific names in that account so that people who are reading it knew it was real. It was verifiable. So he gives a list of names here of people who were present when this took place. This wasn't just Jesus' followers. We don't even know who Joanna is, right? But she was there that day, and she's listed in the resurrection account of Jesus. So as people are reading this years later and now centuries later, they can go, okay, those were real people living at a real time. And then over 1,000 people, basically encounter Jesus from the time he resurrects from the dead until the time he ascends into heaven. And so there's all these people. They're not just name dropping to name drop. They're name dropping so that you and I know, okay, this isn't just a made up story. These are real people that lived at a historical time, and they were there in that time, okay? Verse 11, but the story sounded like nonsense to the men, and they didn't believe it. However, Peter jumped up and ran to the tomb to look. He peered in and saw the empty linen wrappings, and then he went home again, wondering what had happened. We're going to jump down to verse 35 of Luke 24. Then the two from Emmaus told their story of how Jesus had appeared to them as they were walking along the road and how they recognized him as he was breaking bread. And just as they were telling about it, Jesus himself suddenly was standing among them. Peace be with you, he said. But the whole group was startled and frightened, thinking they were seeing a ghost. Why are you frightened, he asked. Why are your hearts filled with doubt? It's interesting. He can detect doubt, and he's standing right there. Verse 39, look at my hands, look at my feet. You can see that it's really me. Touch me and make sure that I am not a ghost, because ghosts don't have bodies, as you see that I do. As he spoke, he showed them his hands and his feet. Still, they stood there in disbelief, filled with joy and wonder. Then he asked them, do you have anything here to eat? They gave him a piece of broiled fish, and he ate it as they watched. Apparently, rising from the dead makes you hungry. All right, so he's like, hey, fellas, it's me. Here's my scars. Here's my hands. Here's my feet. You got any supper? Like, I haven't eaten in like 3 days, all right? And so they you picture this. They give him some broiled fish, and they must just been standing there going, like, he's eating fish right now, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, it was just this out-of-body experience for them seeing the resurrected body of Jesus. Jesus' followers were not expecting the resurrection. They were not sitting outside the tomb going, 10, 9, 8, 7, right? They weren't counting down to the resurrection like we do in the American church today. They weren't doing that. You know why? Because they had no clue it was going to happen. They were not only not expecting the resurrection, they weren't expecting the crucifixion. Look at verse 1 of Luke chapter 24 again. It says, very early Sunday morning, the women went to the tomb taking the spices that they had prepared. Why are they taking spices to the tomb? They weren't prepared for Jesus to be executed on Friday. They were so unprepared, they were scrambling to make preparations after he died because they borrowed a tomb for his body to be laid in. It wasn't even Jesus' family's tomb. That's how unprepared they were for the crucifixion. And so here they go a few days later to the tomb, and they're taking the spices because they never had time to prepare the body for burial. They didn't have the embalming system that we have today, and so they would oftentimes put spices inside the grave clothes of the person that was deceased to help the stench of the body not smell so bad as it decayed. And they hadn't even had time to do that. And so they go there not to see a resurrected Jesus, they go there to experience mourning and sadness and to prepare the body of Jesus to basically be left for the rest of their lives. They had no idea that Jesus wasn't going to be there. They were going to see Jesus' body. They had no clue that Jesus was going to rise from the dead. It wasn't something they expected. It caught them off guard. And this is this reality that Easter is a reminder to us that God can never be boxed in by our expectations. That just when you think it's over, it's not over. No matter how dead a situation is in your life, God shows up in the most unexpected ways. And he turns mourning into dancing in just a few short minutes. So what I want to do with the time that we have left this morning is I just want to look at this passage of scripture in Luke, and I just want to draw out 4 truths that you can hang on to this Easter because Jesus is alive, because of Easter. Okay, and the first one is this. Because of Easter, we can release our regrets. Have you ever struggled with regret? You know, one of the things that we say at our church all the time, you'll hear around here if you come a while, is that there's no perfect people allowed. Like, if you're perfect, this is not the church for you. Okay, we just don't want perfect people here. We go, you know why? Because none of us are perfect. And so pretending to be perfect doesn't make the church better. It actually weakens the church because we're not really honest about the stuff that we struggle with. And so we say, no perfect people out. And if you have imperfections in your life, you probably have regrets. I have regrets that I can think of that I have last week, right? Things that I said or did that I wish I hadn't said or done. For some of you, maybe you have a regret from last night. Maybe for some of you, you have a regret. Maybe it was a DUI you got several years ago. Maybe for some of you, it was a relationship that ended, that you ended it in all the wrong kind of ways. Maybe for some of you that are parents, you have this regret that you wounded a child and you haven't had a chance to make it up to them. You haven't had a chance to make it right. Maybe for some of you, there's regret in your dating life. Maybe for some of you, there's regret in your vocation. You quit a job before you should have. Maybe for some of you, there's just this deep-seated regret of where you've been in your life spiritually. It looks different for all of us. All of us have regrets. And no matter where you are today, God doesn't want us carrying those regrets. And so what I thought we could do is, mass confession is good for the soul. And so we're going to go around with an open mic. No, I'm just joking. We're not going to do that. But I thought we could come clean this Easter. So if you have regrets in your life, if you ever posted anything on social media that you wish you hadn't, if you've ever said something to a parent that you wish you hadn't, if you've ever inappropriately gone off on a 2-year-old in a way that you wish you hadn't, if you've ever wounded a friend, if you've ever failed morally, if you've ever failed academically, if you've ever failed athletically, if you've ever failed vocationally, if you've ever failed spiritually, I just want you to raise your hand right where you're at. All right, some of you are lying, and that's a failure right there. So you should regret lying right now because you didn't raise your hand, okay? But we've all failed, right? We all have these regrets. And I love what it says in verse 12 of this passage. It says this: Peter jumped up and ran to the tomb to look. When he heard the story of Jesus resurrecting from the dead, when he heard that Jesus was not there, he immediately got up and went to see. You know why? Because he was carrying some regret. He was carrying some failure, some fresh failure in his heart. Those of you that are familiar with the story know about Peter's regret. There's this beautiful scene in the upper room where Jesus is washing Peter's feet. And Peter's like, no, Jesus, I'm not worthy for you to wash my feet. And Peter goes into this monologue of declaring his allegiance to Jesus. And Jesus says, well, you're going to deny me. And Peter's like, no, I would lay down my life for you before I deny you. And just a few short hours later, he didn't deny him once, he denied him 3 times. Right? And so Peter is probably feeling responsible in some way. The soldiers come to arrest Jesus. Peter has one moment of bravery and slices off the soldier's ear. Jesus heals the ear. And then Peter slips away and proceeds to deny Jesus. And so he hears this story that these angels appeared and they announced the resurrection of Jesus, and he has to go see because he thinks the resurrection could mean he could be restored. Things could be right again. He could get rid of his regret. And I love this passage of Scripture. If you go back 2 chapters, right before Jesus is arrested, it says this about Peter, or right as Jesus is getting arrested, in verse 54 of Luke 22, so just 2 chapters before Jesus is getting arrested, it says this: they led him away and took him to the house of the high priest, and Peter followed at a distance. And as I was thinking about regret in my life, and maybe regret in your life, that phrase, followed at a distance, most of the regret that I have in my life has come because I have had distance between my relationship with God and myself. Like Peter followed Jesus at a distance. And maybe for some of you, you have these regrets. You have these failures in your life that you can't seem to outrun. You can't seem to overcome. You ignore them and you pretend like they're not there, but they weigh on you. And you brought this huge baggage in here. And maybe it's because for the longest time, you followed Jesus from a distance. See, in my life, I don't know about in your life, but in my life, regret lives in the gap between me and Jesus. The closer I am to Jesus, the less regret I tend to live with. And so Jesus raises from the dead, right? And he has this experience with Peter, and they go walking along the beach. And Jesus has this conversation with Peter, and he begins to call him back into a relationship with him. And he doesn't even give Peter a chance to apologize. He doesn't even give Peter a chance to own the mistake that he made. He said, you know what, Peter? You're going to transform. On this rock, I'm going to build my church. Like, I'm going to use you in powerful ways. And Peter becomes one of the founders of the church today. And so I don't know what regrets that you are living with, but because Jesus overcame the grave, you can overcome regret. See, the cross of Christ, the crucifixion of Christ, allowed you to overcome your sin. The resurrection of Christ allows you to overcome regret. Because he takes it away, because the same power that rose Jesus from the dead can live in you. And it's powerful, more powerful than your regrets. The second thing that Easter brings us is we can allow our scars to tell our story. We can allow our scars to tell our story. Look at verse 39 and 40. It says, look at my hands. This is Jesus talking. Look at my feet. You can see that it's really me. Touch me and make sure that I'm not a ghost, because ghosts don't have bodies as you see that I do. As he spoke, he showed them his hands and feet. 4 times in this short little passage, he's offering his hands and feet, hands and feet. Why? Because that's where his scars are. Don't miss this, guys. Don't miss this Easter. The resurrected body of Jesus had scars. Okay, so the power that raised Christ from the dead didn't take away the scars. Like, Jesus comes back to life, and he could have had a brand new body. He could have had a brand new look, could have had a perfected body, but he kept the scars. The resurrection didn't eliminate the scars that Jesus had. And I don't think those scars were for him. I think they were for us. He says, look at my hands, look at my feet. Why? Because you're going to experience scars. You're going to experience wounds in life. The Savior of the world had scars after resurrecting from the dead. What makes us believe that we won't have scars? And I think for many of us, we struggle in our faith because we've been sold this version of Christianity that says, okay, if you follow God, your marriage is going to be great. If you follow God, you're going to have amazing friendships. If you just follow God, your finances are all going to work out. If you follow God, you're going to find your purpose, and you're never going to struggle with your meaning or purpose in your vocation. If you just follow God, it's going to fix all your problems. And so we have written these prescriptions to people saying, okay, Jesus plus your life equals an amazing life. And then people experience wounds, and then people experience divorce, and then people experience abandonment, then people experience getting fired. Then people experience their boyfriend or girlfriend breaking up with them. Then people experience people betraying them or saying nasty things about them and thinking, whoa, God, this isn't what I signed up for. I thought you plus my life equals amazing. And here we have Jesus, who has resurrected from the dead. He's overcome sin, he's overcome death, he's overcome the grave, and he still has scars. And could it be that those scars were there to tell his story, just like your scars are there to tell your story? My wife and I, many of you know, my wife and I travel and speak all over the country. We basically go around telling the worst parts of our life to thousands of people every year. That's what we get to do. We talk about our marriage failing. We talk about being addicted to pornography. We talk about experiencing sexual abuse. And then we close in prayer and say, praise Jesus. All right, that's what we do. We go into churches and we share the worst parts of our life. And you know what people do? They come back to us and they share the worst parts of their life. We feel like we've been given the mission of going first so that people feel safe going second. And over the last couple of months, one of the greatest joys of my life as we started this church is, like I said, all of us are new. And so we're all getting to know each other. And I've gone out to lunch, I've gone out to coffee, I've gone out to dinner with several people in our church. And they just share their story. And they just start talking about, me and my wife, we struggled from this year to this year, or I got fired from my job, or, when I was a kid, my dad left when I was 7, and they start talking and just kind of opening up. And then they kind of look at me after a few minutes thinking that I'm going to be bothered, or thinking I'm going to be overwhelmed, or thinking I'm going to be like, well, if that's your deal, Hope City isn't the place for you. And usually I have tears in my eyes. I'm like, dude, that is amazing. Not amazing that you had to go through that. It's amazing what God brought you through. And I feel honored to hear people's stories. And so whatever you've gone through in your life, whatever you've experienced in your life, it could have wounded you, but it's not supposed to define you. The scars that are left behind are there for you to share the story of how God brought you through it. And so don't be intimidated by your scars. Don't be ashamed of your scars. Don't feel like this isn't a place that you can't share your scars. This is a place where wounded people get to help other wounded people. I love this quote from from a writer named Brennan Manning. He says this, he says, Christians who remain in hiding continue to live the lie. We deny the reality of our sin. In a futile attempt to erase our past, we deprive the community of our healing. If we conceal our wounds out of fear and shame, our inner darkness can neither be illuminated nor become light for others. But when we dare to live as forgiven men and women, we join the wounded healers and draw closer to Jesus. Like, I want this to be a community of wounded healers. Right, where we come and we go, hey, this happened to me. Hey, I was really wounded that this marriage failed. Hey, I really messed up here. I really dropped the ball. But look how God has showed up. Look at all that God has done. So no matter where you are, no matter where you've been, God doesn't discount you because of your scars. He wants to use them to tell your story. Third thing that we can get from Easter is we can be honest about our doubts and disbeliefs. Verse 41, it says, still they stood there in disbelief, filled with joy and wonder. I love this verse so much. I never really noticed it before in this story, but it's just so transparent. It's just so honest. Like, we just assume, like, Jesus rose from the dead and the disciples are like high-fiving, like, that's cool. I've never seen that before, all right? Don't call it a comeback. I've been here for years, right? Like, we just assumed it was like that, right? But I love that they stood there in disbelief first. They could not believe it was happening. And they were there. Okay, another translation of this verse would be, Jesus freaking rose from the dead, all right? Like, come on, right? Like, are you kidding me right now? Like, that would be another translation of it. Because it was so unbelievable. There was so much disbelief wrapped up in joy and wrapped up in wonder, right? It was all these emotions all convoluted together. Like, did this really happen? Oh my gosh, what if this really happened? Oh my gosh, this really happened. Like, all wrapped up into one. There's this beautiful authenticity. Verse 11 then says, but the story sounded like nonsense to them, and some of them didn't believe it. And maybe that's where you are today. Maybe you're coming to Easter because somebody invited you and you wanted to honor their invitation. That's so amazing that you would do that, but you're not really into God right now. You don't really believe it's a good story. It's nice to get new clothes. It's amazing to celebrate and have Easter brunch, but you don't really believe that Jesus rose from the dead, and that's okay. The people who were closest to him did not believe it either, and they were standing next to him. Okay, so you're in good company. God doesn't ask you to go where he is. He meets you where you are, right? And there's this honesty. When we come to God with our disbeliefs and our doubts, we can't overcome disbeliefs and doubts by pretending they don't exist. We can only overcome disbelief and doubt by taking them and saying and being honest about them, saying, hey, time out here. You know what you're saying, right? Like, someone brought themselves back to life. Isn't that a little weird? And I would say yes. That's weird, okay? But it's also amazing. And if it's true, and several hundred people account for it historically, it changes everything. It changes everything. And so bring God your doubts and disbelief. We can be honest about them. And maybe for some of us, we see resurrections in other people's lives, but we don't believe God can do that in our lives. And I told you John has the same account of this story, and he records an interaction with Mary that Mary has at the tomb. And I wanted to share it with you as we kind of wind down today. It says this is Jesus asking Mary, he says, woman, why are you crying? Who is it that you're looking for? And it says, Mary says, thinking he was the gardener, she said, sir, if you've carried him away, tell me where you put him. Like, the people who were closest to Jesus didn't recognize him after he had resurrected. That was very interesting. She thought he was the gardener. The disciples thought he was a ghost. Thomas doubted that he was even real. Maybe you don't see the resurrection that God has for your life because you just don't recognize it. Maybe it looks different than what you thought it was going to look like. And I think the church contributes to some of this because we promise resurrections, but sometimes there are things that just can't be resurrected. They have to be recreated. Right? Like, for some of you that have gone through a divorce, you know that marriage is over, that marriage is dead. There's nothing you can do to make that marriage come back to life. And you carry that guilt, you carry that shame, you carry that burden with you. And we talk about resurrection, just trust Jesus, things are going to be resurrected. Maybe it's not the resurrection of that relationship, maybe it's the resurrection of your heart to engage in another relationship. Maybe for some of you there's a dream that's died and you're like, man, God, I thought you were a God of resurrections, and God's saying, hey, I had to let that dream die so I could resurrect a new dream. Maybe for some of you, it's a job and that was your dream job and you just felt like, God, why did you take that away? I thought you were a God of resurrection. He's going to say, hey, I had to let that job die so I could take you to a place where I really want you. Maybe we don't believe in resurrections because we have expectations of what we think they look like and we don't recognize them when they're there, just like the people closest to Jesus. Finally, we can have hope for our future. Because of Easter, we can have hope for our future. I love this passage in Colossians chapter 2. This is the Message version. It says, when you were stuck in your old sin-dead life, you were incapable of responding to God. And God brought you alive, right along with Christ. Think of that. All sins forgiven, the slate wiped clean, the old arrest warrant canceled and nailed to the cross of Christ. What he's saying is, while you were stuck in your regrets, while you were stuck in your failures, while you couldn't even respond to the love of God, Christ did something that you could never do. And he not only took on your sin and nailed it to the cross, he overcame the penalty of that sin and rose from the dead so that you can have life. Not just life on this earth, but life for all of eternity with him. And I know that sounds far-reaching, and I know it sounds kind of abstract, but for some of you in this room right now, you feel it. You've been running from God for a long time. You've been piling up regrets. You've been dealing with your doubts. You haven't been able to overcome your disbelief. And today, this Easter, God is saying, hey, look at my hands. Look at my feet. Look at the scars that I've allowed to heal in your life. Look at the resurrections that you might not have recognized at the time, but that I had in mind for you all along. And he wants to resurrect some of your hearts today. He wants to give you not just an improved version of yourself, he wants to recreate you. He wants to give you a brand new start, a brand new life, the slate wiped clean. And for some of you, that just starts with asking God, asking Jesus to be in a relationship with you. And some of you have never done that before. You've never made that step. You've gone to church and you know stuff about God, right? And you can sing some of the songs. Maybe some of you even listen to Christian radio. But you never really invited Jesus to be in a relationship with you. There's a distance. You follow Jesus at a distance. And today, Easter Sunday, because he is alive again, you can be alive again. So I don't want to let this moment pass. I want to ask you just to close your eyes. I'm going to ask the band to come up before we close. And if that's you today, and I've had so many regrets in my life, I know exactly where you're at. I've had seasons in my life where I've ran from God. I have seasons in my life not only where did I run from God, I directly opposed God. And the great thing about God is he pursues you. And I don't believe it's an accident that anybody here this morning is here by chance. God brought you to this place. And maybe he wants to shorten the distance between you and him. Maybe he wants you to give up the regret. Maybe he wants you to surrender the doubt and say, Jesus, would you come into my life? Would you take away the sins that I have accumulated? Would you, Jesus, be the leader and the Lord of my life? And can I just ask, just a moment of vulnerability with all of our eyes closed, if that's you today, if you just feel like, man, I need a resurrection. I need my heart to beat again. I need a fresh start with Jesus. Would you just raise your hand right where you're at? Just say, Jesus, I just need you. I need a fresh start today. Thank you guys for being vulnerable. Put your hands down. God, we just thank you so much that you're not only more powerful than the grave, you're more powerful than any sin that we commit, any doubt that we might have. And you offer us fresh starts and new beginnings. God, for the people that have raised their hand this morning, would you just invade their life? Surround them with your love, your grace. Give them a sense of your presence. Allow them to know that you're with them. And you can handle all their doubts. You can handle all their fears. You can handle all their failures. The slate is wiped clean because you are alive again. It's in Jesus' name we pray.